Ready to vote in California?
Here are the 10 propositions on the ballot this November
And what you need to know about them.
Does your school need an update? Proposition 2 would let the state borrow $10 billion in bonds to fund upgrades and repairs for schools. K-12 schools and community colleges could use the money to pay for previous or new construction projects. The state would have to pay the money back with interest over 35 years. Supporters say this money would provide basic safety improvements for schools. Opponents say these kinds of repairs should be included in their budgets and not up to the taxpayers.
Same-sex marriage is currently legal nationwide, but Prop 3 would make it part of the California Constitution, similar to how voters enshrined access to abortion into the state constitution. Prop 3 would remove Proposition 8, which California voters passed over a decade ago, banning same-sex marriage. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled same-sex marriage is legal nationwide in 2015, but after Roe v. Wade was overturned, some fear the High Court could do the same with same-sex marriage. Supporters say this proposition would protect same-sex marriage in California if the Supreme Court overturns its original ruling. Opponents say an amendment would go too far.
Proposition 4 could be one of the largest investments the state has ever made toward climate change. If passed, the state would borrow up to $10 billion in bonds to help fight droughts, wildfires, and sea level rise. It would cost around $400 million per year and take 40 years to pay off. Supporters say climate change is leading to extreme natural disasters in the state, and the need for more funding to fight it is urgent. Opponents say bonds are the most expensive way to pay for things, especially for a state that is facing a budget deficit.
California makes it hard for cities and counties to borrow money for new projects. Most bonds need 2/3 of voter support to pass. Proposition 5 would lower that to 55%, but only for some projects. Those include affordable housing, down payment assistance, and public infrastructure like hospitals, police stations, and parks. Supporters argue that if the majority of voters support a bond, it should pass. However, opponents say that property owners who make up a minority of voters are the ones most likely to have to pay for bonds through property tax increases. They say that's why bonds should only be issued with a 2/3 majority.
The California Constitution bans slavery, except for those behind bars. Prop 6 would remove that exception by prohibiting forced labor in state prisons. Right now, California can require incarcerated individuals to work in kitchens, bathrooms, yards, with or without pay, and those who refuse to work can face discipline. When a similar vote came up in 2022, it fell short of passing, with opponents arguing that it would be too costly for prisons to function properly. This year, supporting the measure would mean allowing prisons to set up voluntary work assignments, where inmates could earn credits to take time off their sentences in exchange for work.
Living in California is expensive. Right now, our minimum wage is $16 per hour. Prop 32 would raise that to $18 by 2026 across the state. To cover basic needs in the cheapest county in California, you would need to earn around $20 per hour. That is, if you're single, have no kids, and work full-time. Certain cities like San Francisco and LA already have a higher minimum wage. And depending on what industry you work in, you might also be earning more, like healthcare workers who had their minimum wage increased to $25 per hour this year. Still, supporters say Prop 32 would benefit at least 2 million workers, including older adults having to support themselves and their families. But opponents say that it puts extra burden on businesses that are already struggling to make ends meet after the pandemic and could force them to raise prices, lay off staff, or close altogether.
Are you a renter or a landlord? Prop 33 could directly impact you. Current state laws keep local governments from limiting what landlords can charge for housing built after 1995. Prop 33 would remove those restrictions and allow local governments to enact rent control. It's no secret California rent is sky high. Supporters say it will help keep Californians in their homes and make sure people can afford to move to the state. But opponents say if this passes, it could prevent new housing from being built. Californians voted on similar rent control propositions in 2018 and 2020. Both times, voters overwhelmingly said no.
What happens when you mix healthcare, landlords, and add a dash of revenge? You get Prop 34. Let me explain. The proposition aims to prevent abuse of a federal prescription drug discount program. It would require providers that make money off the program to spend 98% of those funds on direct patient care, like expanding healthcare services for the poor. Supporters say this will keep health nonprofits from using the money on questionable things, like building luxury apartments or buying up rental properties. Los Angeles-based AIDS Healthcare Foundation is one of the providers, and maybe the only one, that would be impacted. ballot. They say this measure is illegal because the law bans measures that target a specific group for retribution and plan to challenge it in court. That's why they call it a revenge proposition, because of their advocacy for rent control measures like Prop 33, which begs the question, who is behind Prop 34? Groups that represent landlords, property managers, and developers. Are you still following along? Opponents of Prop 34 agree that spending rules should be tightened on the federal program, but that it would be better done through the California legislature. They also say only a few healthcare providers will actually face restrictions on spending based on very specific criteria. There you have it, Prop 34C.
Prop 35 is arguably the most complicated measure on the ballot, but it's really important. Let me break it down. There's currently a tax on healthcare providers that helps fund services for Medi-Cal. That's the state's low-income health insurance program that covers 1 in 3 Californians. Prop 35 would require that the money generated by that tax continue to be spent on Medi-Cal services. It would also prevent lawmakers from using that money elsewhere to backfill budget deficits. Supporters say a yes on Prop 35 would support low-income patients, but it could also further plunge the state into debt.
Prop 36 has really divided California Democrats. Meanwhile, Republicans strongly support the measure. This measure would increase the jail time for drug possession and thefts worth less than $950. Those crimes are currently considered misdemeanors in California. But Prop 36 would allow prosecutors to charge someone caught stealing 3 times with a felony, regardless of how much the merchandise costs. It would do the same for a 3rd drug possession charge. Prop 36 would roll back parts of California's landmark 2014 law that intended to reduce jail populations and fund programs to keep people from committing crimes in the first place. Supporters say there aren't enough consequences for people who steal and use drugs. Opponents say more money would get diverted to locking people up and away from treatment programs. To learn more about California propositions on the ballot
And other information like Senate and congressional candidates, go to sfchronicle.com.